What if I told you you just won a round-the-world trip to visit the planet's most famous landmarks? Nice, right? But there's a catch. You might be visiting them for the last time in your life. That's because these landmarks are threatened to disappear during your lifetime. Yikes! Ah, Paris, the city of love. For our modern eyes, it's hard to imagine the city without its most famous landmark, the Eiffel Tower. But it wasn't always there, of course. Gustav Eiffel, the tower's architect, was commissioned to expose it during the 1889 World Fair. But the so-called Iron Lady was only meant to stand for 20 years. After that, it was going to be demolished, except that, this plan was never implemented. The tower wasn't taken down because of an antenna built on top of the tower, and it conducts wireless signals. But there's a problem. The Iron Lady is made of iron. And with time and bad weather, which Paris happens to get a lot of, iron deteriorates. It rusts, and this rusting makes the iron weak, up until the point where it can crack. And if a tower that is made purely of iron starts to crack, you know what this means. No more selfies eating croissants in front of the famous Tour Eiffel. Apparently, French authorities are aware that this is happening, but instead of repairing the whole tower, they're kind of just painting over the rust. Your next stop is in beautiful Rome. You are here to visit, you guessed it, the Colosseum, one of the world's most visited monuments. The gladiators used to put on shows there. Well, you might as well say arrivederci to it while you can. Like a lot of ancient monuments, the Colosseum is in danger of disappearing. It survived for almost 2,000 years since it was commissioned by Emperor Vespasian. But due to yearly exposure to harsh weather, the monument is getting weaker. The problem here is mainly snow. When snow falls upon the Colosseum, the freezing water infiltrates the cracks of the rocks and makes them bloat. You know, like when you put a soda can into the freezer and the bottom pops out? I know, snow is a kind of infrequent visitor in Rome, but even rare below-zero temperatures can damage the Colosseum seriously. And since we can't control the weather, who knows how long we'll get to see this beauty around? After hopping on a red-eye to India, you arrive at the unique Taj Mahal. It's even more mesmerizing in person than it is in pictures. The Taj is one of the 7 wonders of the modern world. But why is it at risk of disappearing, you might ask? The monument was finished way back in 1643. It was made with pristine white marble as a gift from Emperor Shah Jahan to his beloved wife. But if our white shirts get dirty just by stepping outside the house, imagine an open-air monument that has existed for over 4 centuries. The Taj Mahal is located in the city of Agra, right beside the Yamuna River. Over the years, the region has become very polluted, and all of this pollution is helping to destroy the Taj. India's Supreme Court has been on the case for many years now, and they say the monument is turning greenish and brown. So, high authorities decided that either the local government restores the Taj Mahal completely, or they'll shut it down, or worse, destroy it. For the good of humanity, I hope they decide to restore it already. Otherwise, we'll be down to only 6 wonders. Finally, you've made it to South America. More specifically, you're now in the mountainous country of Peru. If you're not used to such high altitudes, you might get a little dizzy. But it's worth it to see the mesmerizing Incan ruins of Machu Picchu. The city is located at over 7,000 feet above sea level, and no one knows how the Incas built such a sophisticated village. That's why the site attracts around 440,000 visitors every single year. But since regulation is not so strict, the site is also slowly deteriorating. Machu Picchu may be the victim of something known as over-tourism. I mean, if you look at any footage from the site on a normal day, it's pretty packed up. And even if it's a stone-made town and stones are pretty resistant, they do suffer from erosion. Man-made or weather-made. Oh boy, I really don't like the sound of that. There's another stone monument that you need to check off your list. Can you guess which one it is? Yup, Stonehenge. Located in the peaceful hills of Wiltshire, England, Stonehenge has been around for over 5,000 years. Well, nobody knows exactly when it was built, but bear with me. If the only cause for disappearance would be erosion, then it would make the monument millions of years before it disappeared. But that's not the case. Since 1995, there have been multiple proposals from British authorities to build an underground tunnel that connects southeast and southwest England. The thing is, the tunnel passes underneath Stonehenge, and it might rock the site's foundation. Get it? Rock? Anyway, since the project was suggested, local supporters of the monument have found a Save Stonehenge alliance to keep the monument safe. They strongly believe that any enterprise, such as this tunnel, will severely harm the site. Ah, Egypt. This time, to arrive at your destination, you travel in style. And by that, I mean camels. Just for the photo op, of course. But why are you here? You came to check out the Great Sphinx. You know, the one with the broken nose? The Sphinx was also built way back in the day. Try over 4,000 years ago. And back then, they used what they had at their disposal, limestone. Now, some researchers think that hazardous weather may be damaging the Sphinx's limestones. You see, they're very porous types of rock, so water easily infiltrates inside of them, making erosion stronger and faster. But water is also coming from down below. Unlike the pyramids of Giza, the Great Sphinx was carved directly from the bedrock. And right underneath the monument, there's a riverbed, which also infiltrates into the Sphinx, making it weaker. Fingers crossed that Egypt doesn't get a lot of rainfall in the next few centuries. I hope you brought your swimsuit because it's time to dive deep into the Dead Sea. Except that you probably won't get too deep. You know, since there's so much salt in the water that you basically only float. Fun fact, this sea is 10 times saltier than the ocean. It may be a little ironic that the Dead Sea is at risk of actually perishing, but it's true. The lake level is dropping 4 feet every year. It has to do with one of the sea's main tributaries. A tributary is a river that flows into a much larger body of water. The thing is, the region is not so rich in natural water, so some of the local authorities ended up diverting small tributaries for basic human uses. But since every action has a reaction, the Dead Sea is now facing some difficulties. Back in the USA, it's time to visit the city that never sleeps. And if you've understood this trip by now, you already know the landmark we're visiting. It's Lady Liberty. It may come as a surprise to some, but the famous Statue of Liberty was originally copper. It's turned green due to oxidation. I mean, maybe I would also turn green if I was constantly exposed to New York's harsh weather. Some researchers say that air pollution can also speed up oxidation processes, threatening the long life of Lady Liberty. Of course, New York City does its share of maintenance. Hopefully it'll be enough for us to keep seeing the statue during our lifetime. Hey, it's time to head back home. I sure enjoyed this trip. Hope you did too. Let's hope we can still visit these places.
Calls, internet pages, malicious links. Those are the ways someone can scam you in the 21st century. But what if someone tried to sell you the Eiffel Tower, Big Ben, or even the Brooklyn Bridge? Hard to believe, but all of these, and so many other similar things, happened throughout history. You may have already heard of George C. Parker, one of the most fascinating American con artists that mostly operated in the late 1800s. Con man is usually a term for a person who tricks others. First, they gain their trust and then persuade them into believing something that's not true. Parker was a native New Yorker, and he made his living by making illegal sales of landmark items he didn't really own. He managed to sell popular properties, such as the Statue of Liberty, Madison Square Garden, the Metropolitan Museum of Art, and, of course, the Brooklyn Bridge. That's the one he's best known for. He repeatedly sold the bridge, at least twice a week. One time he even got to a price of $50,000. The new owner wouldn't even know he was a victim of a con until the New York police officers would stop them from doing things you'd normally be able to do on your own property, like setting up toll booths in the middle of the Brooklyn Bridge. The Brooklyn Bridge opened for business at the end of the 19th century. It was a toll bridge, which means pedestrians had to pay money every time they wanted to cross it. Riders with horses had to pay 5 cents, and if you had a horse and wagon, it would cost you 10 cents. Tens of thousands of people would cross the bridge every day as they were heading to work from Brooklyn to Manhattan. A couple of years later, this pedestrian toll was repealed, so some obviously thought they could bring it back. Parker would often choose different names, such as Warden Kennedy, James J. O'Brien, Mr. Taylor, Mr. Roberts, and so on, while pursuing his scams. He also used multiple methods to present himself as the legal owner of properties he was selling. For example, forging documents to make his cons more believable, and setting up fake sales offices when needed. Also, when he sold Grant's tomb, he posed as the general's grandson. One of the most popular places he'd operate was Ellis Island. He'd wait for people coming from different countries, especially those who had money they wanted to invest in some new enterprises. His favorite target wasn't just people who wanted to move to the US, but tourists on their first visit to New York. What a welcome, huh? The United Kingdom had a man who did a similar thing, but in the opposite direction. Arthur Ferguson was selling famous English national monuments and other public properties to tourists coming from the US during the 1920s. He sold monuments like Big Ben, Nelson's Column in Trafalgar Square, and Buckingham Palace. And yes, he'd also sell such buildings over and over again, finding different buyers for them. He managed to scam so many people because buyers were not informed well. Plus, they were too embarrassed to tell their stories in public once they found out the truth. Ferguson then went to the United States and sold the White House to a rancher who had to pay $100,000 yearly. Like George Parker, Ferguson also tried to sell the Statue of Liberty to a tourist from Australia. The man wanted to buy the impressive structure, but he couldn't collect the money in time. Ferguson was getting more and more impatient, bringing it up all the time and pushing his buyer to get the money. The buyer pretty soon grew very suspicious. Finally, he decided to share the entire story with the police. They finally managed to catch Ferguson. He was sentenced to 5 years because they found out about some other scams he did in the past. The Eiffel Tower was made available for sale too, somewhere in the 1930s. Victor Lustig was another famous con man who was 46 years old at the time. He rocked jazz-era America as well as the rest of the world. While in Paris, he made an enormous business deal. He actually sold the Eiffel Tower, and not just once, but twice. Victor's deal was pretty simple. He set up meetings with people who needed scrap iron. He convinced them the Eiffel Tower was going to be demolished because it was in desperate need of repair. So, whoever offers the biggest price gets the materials. He was a charming man with strong communication skills that helped him convince his buyers that the Eiffel Tower was really going to become theirs after that purchase. He had dozens of fake passports, often changing names while making illegal business deals. There's an interesting local legend told in Wichita Falls, Texas. In 1919, one man, J.D. McMahon, had an idea to convince people who lived there he was going to build a large property that would stretch far in the air, something we'd call a skyscraper today. He collected $200,000 and then constructed a building that was only 4 stories high. It was 16 feet deep and 10 feet wide, way smaller than it was supposed to be. The measurement he presented in the paperwork wasn't in feet, but in inches, which, as a detail, investors kinda overlooked. The investor who came up with the original idea, of course, ran off with his windfall, leaving the embarrassment called the world's littlest skyscraper behind. Back in the 18th century, a woman called Barbara Ernie traveled across and around Liechtenstein. During her trip, she would tote a big trunk secured to her back. She lived a nomadic existence, which is why she'd often make stops to try to get lodging for the night. Every time she stopped, Ernie would tell her innkeeper that her most valuable items were in her trunk. Then she'd ask the owner to lock the trunk in the most secure room in the inn. The innkeepers obliged. They weren't aware there weren't jewels or clothes inside of the trunk. It was actually her traveling buddy, who would then spring out of the trunk, grab all the valuables, and then run away with Ernie again. And that's something that lasted for 15 years, until they finally caught the traveling duo. A furniture salesman, Ed Barbara, from the San Francisco Bay Area, discovered his business formula back in the 1970s and 1980s. He peppered that region with commercials that irritated people very much. Then he took it to another level. At one point, he told everyone he had a 50% interest in the Golden Gulch gold mine, right next to Truth or Consequences, New Mexico. Everyone heard the story that the site was ready to excavate gold, and we're talking about a lot of gold, worth as much as $93 million in the first year only. His company sold shares, which netted the salesman big profits. Of course, all that was a con. A certain truck driver didn't have a job in 2010, so he came up with a pretty unusual idea. He tried to sell the Ritz Hotel in London for almost $300 million. Not bad for the person who wants to buy it, considering the real value was going up to over $700 million. The driver was pretending he was a good friend of the owners of this fancy hotel. He also introduced himself as their associate. He said the owners had their own reasons to sell the hotel through a third party, and they couldn't discuss them. His buyer even handed him over $1 million as an initial fee. The driver then told him he got an even better offer, so he would pass the offer to another buyer, but wouldn't return the money. People tried to sell bizarre things on the internet too. For example, in the early 2000s, when the internet was only rising, and many people didn't even understand the concept of online shopping yet, one man from Australia tried to sell a whole country on eBay. Yep, you could buy New Zealand in a 1-month auction, and the starting price was 0.01 Australian dollars. Some potential buyers took this pretty seriously, so the price got to $3,000 before eBay stopped it.
It's one of the most important national monuments of the United States, with over 500,000 visitors each year. The Washington Monument was constructed to commemorate George Washington, the first American president. But if you've ever looked at it closely, in person, or by Googling his pictures, you've surely noticed it has 2 different colors. Well, it's not a design choice, if that's what you're wondering. The Washington National Monument Society, the authority in charge of the construction, ran out of funding, and the project was put on hold in the 1850s. It took another 25 years for the authorities to resume the construction. They finished the upper 2/3 of the monument in 1884. Since they evidently used marble from a different location, given the time that had passed, it was difficult to envision how these materials would behave in the future. These 2 sections looked very much alike at first, but with time, mostly due to winds, rain, and erosion, they ended up having different hues. There's even a third portion of marble, which is noticeable only if you pay very close attention. The constructors initially went for a marble provider in Massachusetts, but quickly realized the colors didn't match. They had to switch to another supplier, but their mistake resulted in this third shade of marble. It's only noticeable up front, so people mostly think that the monument has 2 colors. The builders figured out the difference quite fast and found a type of marble that resembled the initial one. But the new material eventually turned to a different color too, mostly due to weather conditions. Are you one of those people who like to spend their free time on Pinterest or Instagram in search of your next travel location? Then you surely haven't missed a little Italian town called Cinque Terre. The reason why it's so popular among photographers and globetrotters is its brightly painted buildings, which come in a nice contrast to the crystal clear ocean waters. These houses come in a huge selection of colors, from green to yellow and even bright pink. So it's no wonder this location is such a hit. It looks more like a painting than an actual place on Earth. But why are these houses so gorgeously bright? Local legends say that fishers used to paint their homes in various colors, so that they could quickly spot them from the water as they came back home from the sea. Now, some other buildings come with coloring so specific that their inhabitants are prohibited from changing it by law. It's the case of the Pink City, otherwise known as Jaipur in India. It has numerous buildings of different hues of pink, from dusty rose to fuchsias. This impressive coloring dates back to the 1800s. Rumor has it that the Indian Maharaja of the time, Sawai Ram Singh, wanted to welcome Prince Albert during his visit. So he literally painted the whole town pink, which of course begs the question, why he chose pink and not any other color? And it turns out this hue was meant to subtly imply the idea of a welcoming location or a place of hospitality. Jaipur isn't the only monochrome city in the world. Its blue counterpart is located in Morocco. It's called Chefchaouen. Some locals say that the city is painted blue to symbolize the beautiful coloring of the Mediterranean Sea. Others consider that painting their houses blue keeps them cooler when it's hot. There are even claims that painting a house blue can help keep mosquitoes away. People believe that the hue resembles the waves of the sea, which isn't a really desirable location for insects, if you think about it. Now, this construction has become the undeniable symbol of the City of Love. The Tour Eiffel. I can smell a freshly baked baguette, can't you? Well, it turns out the Eiffel Tower has a little chromatic secret of its own. This famous French monument is painted chestnut brown these days, but it hasn't always been this color. The engineer who built the tower and also gave it its name was a man called Gustave Eiffel. He claimed that the initial paint used for the tower, a very bright red, was supposed to help protect the construction from rust, kind of like the Golden Gate Bridge does in San Francisco. But since it was built, the Eiffel Tower has had many different hues, like ochre, yellow, and several shades of brown. At one point, they even used the ombre paint effect. It made the tower look as if it was fading upon reaching the sky. I've hardly ever heard a more touching story than that of the Taiwanese Rainbow Grandpa. His name is Huang Yongfu, and his story begins in the late 2000s. Given he was officially the last resident, the local authorities were just about to bring down his small village in order to make room for a modern apartment complex. To cope with his sadness, the man started painting the walls of the houses in his village. He began with drawings of birds, cats, and eventually people. In 2010, a local university student found out about this little DIY project, and the rest was history. With the help of a fundraising campaign, this little village now attracts a staggering number of tourists each year, over 1 million. It's no wonder the local authorities eventually renounced their plans. While we're on the subject of beautiful designs, there's a library out there that actually looks like a giant bookshelf. No, it's not a scene from a fantasy movie. Somebody actually built that. One of the facades of the Kansas City Public Library looks like an ordinary row of books lined up on a shelf. Well, not really ordinary, since the books are 25 feet tall and 9 feet wide each. You don't need to be a book nerd to want to check this one out soon. The world's largest basket isn't meant for overweight cats. It's actually a building. Yup, there's a building out there that is actually shaped like a basket. You can find it in Newark, Ohio. It was initially built to serve as headquarters for the Longaberger Company, an American producer of handcrafted wood baskets. It's also renowned among professionals as one of the best-known examples of mimetic architecture. That's a type of design where buildings are constructed to mimic their function or purpose. The building covers 180,000 square feet. It cost around $30 million to build and was completed in 1997. With 7 floors and a central atrium, it also has a glass ceiling which lets natural light get inside. This immense basket is also topped with 2 steel handles. They're equipped with heating elements that prevent them from freezing. They also protect the glass atrium situated right below from any ice that might fall on it during the winter season. Darmstadt, Germany, there's a residential building complex built in the 1990s, named the Weissspirale. It has a wonderful design, as well as an interesting story to back it up. The name literally translates to forest spiral. This might refer to the plan of the building, along with the fact that its roof is green. Not simply in color, though. This swirly building has a jaw-dropping forest on its roof with maple and lime trees. The unique construction was completed in 2000. It has 105 apartments and more than 100 windows, each of them with its particular shape and size. With 12 floors at its highest point, the building also houses a cafe and a bar. Another interesting feature? Each corner in the construction is rounded off. Now, should you ever find yourself visiting the city of Rotterdam in the Netherlands, try not to miss the cube houses. These unique buildings are placed above ground level on top of a pedestrian bridge close to the city center and the Rotterdam Black metro station. In the 20th century, the city of Rotterdam was damaged. That's why later it became the focus of new, cutting-edge architecture designs. Dutch architect Piet Blom started designing functional housing, which could also leave some room for pedestrians on the ground level. He got the idea for these houses from simple elements, such as forests and trees. Each house is placed on a hexagonal pylon, a construction made of concrete and designed to look like the trunk of a tree. Each of these pylons has a staircase that leads to well-spaced living areas. Another example of a house that looks like it has just escaped from a fairy tale is the Nautilus House. You can find it near Mexico City, Mexico. With its shell-like shape, it's also one of the first representations of bioarchitecture. The man behind this unique design is Javier Senosieng. He was inspired by the works of Gaudi and Frank Lloyd Wright. The very concept of bioarchitecture is that buildings should be constructed based on structures found in nature. It's also supposed to remind people of their local history and traditions. The Nautilus House doesn't have a lot of storage space, according to the builders, but this structure is supposed to be earthquake-resistant and maintenance-free. Not to mention hundreds of tiny rainbow-colored stained glass windows decorating the building.